Hello YouTube. When you think about leg training, you immediately think of Tom Platz. The man had the best pair of legs in the history of the sport, and the methods that came with creating these monster legs are just as legendary, to the point that I'm certain that many of you guys used to watch Tom Platz train before you went to the gym yourself to do your squats, for inspiration, for motivation. And some of you might even have followed his methods thinking that you could get similarly sized legs by training just like him. And I see a problem with that mindset. I think that many people tend to look at icons of the past, especially the golden era bodybuilders, and just copy what they did blindly because they were so great and they were so charismatic that we sort of take their word at face value. It's something I discussed with Menzer in a video you can actually check out, it's in the description, where I said that the man was so confident and intelligent that people just turned their brains off when listening to him, to the point that whenever he would sneak some idiotic statement in his long rants about his methodology, people just shrugged their shoulders and just accepted it because they trusted him 100%. And I think that's a terrible thing to do as a lifter, as a man. You should be critical in your thinking. And that is what I want to attempt to do today. I want us to look at Tom Platz's methods objectively. So what we're going to do is we're going to separate them from the man. We're going to stop thinking about Platz as this charismatic god, and we're going to think that this advice comes from a random dude. And we're going to see whether or not it actually sticks. Is it something that natural lifters should apply in their leg training? Now, I want to make clear that I'm not judging the worth of Tom Platz as a bodybuilder. His methods clearly worked for him, and they might even work for people on PEDs. But I don't talk to people who are on PEDs. I talk to natural lifters. So my point is that I want to see whether or not you, watching me right now, should be training in a similar fashion, or if you should make some modifications in regards to Tom Platz's methodology. So the first thing that must be pointed out is that there is a clear bias towards a certain lift in Platz's method, and that bias is towards the squat. He loved the squat tremendously. You can find some videos where he tells you that if you're not squatting, you're wasting your time, and if you're doing leg press, you should be doing some squats instead.
Nothing's like squats. I mean, it's like nothing compares to squats. You can do leg presses, but why? Why do an inferior movement? Why do a movement that looks good, but it produces hardly any results?
And the question is why? Because this is a mindset you will see times and times again amongst lifters who will tell you, oh yeah, don't even waste your time on this exercise or this one, just do your squat and you'll get big legs. Why is that? Well, I think it's for two reasons. One, there is some logic in this, and I'm going to explain the logic behind it. But two, there is another X factor that is not often talked about, and I think this is the most important one. So let's start with the one that makes the most sense, the logical factor. Why would the squats be so much better than any other lifts? And by squat, by the way, I mean any type of standing knee flexion. Hack squat, front squat, high bar squat, you name it. Why is it so good for leg hypertrophy? And why was Tom Platz so enamored with them? Why was he so in love with the squat? Well, it's because looking at the stimulus it gives you, you would scarcely be able to name me one other lift that is going to give you that much fatigue and therefore damage and stimulus and growth for the entirety of the leg and the posterior chain. In truth, it doesn't exist. It's the reason why the squat is the king of all lower body exercises. And I know that many people nowadays try to debunk it and present better alternatives. I don't think they exist. If you want an overall good workout for the legs, you should be doing your squats. Platz was absolutely right on that. But if we take a step back and we think logically, the difference is really minor. I mean, yeah, a leg press doesn't compare to a squat, but doesn't mean that a leg press will never build big legs. No, it's a minor difference. It's not drastic. So why would some people freak out if you tell them that you're going to do leg press instead of squats? Well, it's because of that X factor I was talking about, and that X factor is the emotional attachment. People love squats because they're emotionally attached to them. Is it a bad thing? No. I think that as long as the lift works for you, even if there is a better lift out there, if you love the first lift more, hey, just stick to it. Don't waste your time doing something that's more optimal if your heart is not in it. It's a waste of time. Platz's heart was in the squat. My heart is in the squat. I got big legs doing squats only because squat, in truth, is all I need. And it's not just that it's all I need from a physical standpoint. You see, I think that it would be dismissive to just say that people love the squat and praise the benefits of the squat because they just happen to like the lift. I think that there is something that happens to your brain when you squat, a very specific sensation that no other lift can replicate. A bench press can be intense and even very dangerous, but at the end of the day, you're not going to feel that life or death scenario play into your brain. Platz used to say that he would see his life flash before his eyes when he squatted, and that makes a ton of sense. Compare a deadlift to a squat, for example, or even a squat to a leg press. It makes even more sense. What happens if you fail a deadlift? You just let go. What happens if you fail a leg press? Well, you activate the safety and you're fine. But with a squat, the bar literally rests on your back. So even if you know there are safeties in place and you're fine, there is a voice at the back of your head telling you, hey, we have to get that weight up or else we're fucked. And if you have ever had that voice speak to you during a set of squats, you know what it means. Like, it's a different sensation. It triggers something in you, and that's something I think creates down the line tremendous mental strength. I think this is why he loved the squat so much, that Tom Platz. It's not just that he built massive legs off of it, it's that he built a massive pair of cojones as well. And maybe that amount of mental gains is even more beneficial as a man than the physical gains. Maybe that's what he was after, because that fortitude you develop with squats carries over to every single lift and also every single aspect of your life. And this is something we see in Tom Platz's methods. He didn't just take the squat and do a 3x3 or a 5x5 or reps in reserve. No. He used the specs of the squat and that fight or flight trigger that it creates in the brain to push it to the next limit. So what he would do, for example, is he would take 225 pounds and squat it for 10 minutes straight, which is pure torture. Or he would do sets of 20, 30, 40 reps to failure while using the rest pause method to squeeze as many reps out as possible. And you're supposed to pick a weight that you can only do for 10 reps and you just keep going afterwards. You pause in between the reps, you rest with the bar on your back as long as you want, but you just keep going. You never re-rack the bar. And if you ever tried to apply that method, you know that it builds tremendous strength because you just want to re-rack that bar. It's the one thing you want more than anything else in the world. You just want to stop, but if you can find the strength to keep going, it does something in you. Now, the question is, does it do something in you in terms of hypertrophy? Is it really that special? The answer is yes. Why? Because at the end of the day, you still get 20 quality reps. You see, usually with a set of 20 for the squat, most of that would be wasted because it would be junk volume. But since this is supposedly a weight you can only do for 10 reps, these 10 extra reps you get afterwards are all so close to failure that they're very high quality. So, blows up your legs. I'm not going to sit there and tell you that it doesn't work. I know people who made massive quads and created tree trunk legs from Widowmaker squats alone. So I'm not going to argue against the effectiveness of that method. It is actually very difficult, but it is also extremely taxing and therefore develops huge legs. The issue is that this comes at a price. You understand that you're not going to be able to do a set of 20 reps all out and replicate that same effort 2 days afterwards. The intensity is just too much and the recovery and the tax on the recovery is simply too immense. And this is why this is not a method you can apply with high frequency. And this is my first issue with Tom Platz's methods. His methods were super low frequency. And for naturals, I think that it simply doesn't work. Because to me, if you're natty, what you want is you want a split or an approach to training that allows you to train legs as often as possible. You want to train it hard, but if you train it hard and you cannot train them again for a week, in my opinion, it is just going to be counterproductive. You see, the secret to getting big legs is that there is no secret. As long as you manage to stick to that method of training and you give and you feed volume to the legs for years and years at a time, at some point you're going to have big legs. It's absolutely unavoidable. So on paper, that method, that high intensity, high volume method absolutely should work. You're still getting your volume in and you're still getting your high intensity in. If you so happen to only be able to do it once a week, it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, you got 52 sessions in, it's still a shit ton of volume and you're going to have massive legs. The issue is that it's not really applicable in reality. Case in point, I don't know many people who do Widowmaker squats for a full year. Usually you run that for a cycle of maybe a few months max, and at some point it simply stops being sustainable. And the problem is that leg training must be sustainable. So if there is a method that looks really good on paper and gives tons of results but you cannot stick to it, I don't really think it's a good method at all. The best method for any muscle group is the one you can stick with for the longest time. And this is why I usually tell naturals to stay away from very fatiguing leg workouts. Usually they are done within a bro split. Because even though they are great in the moment and you crush your legs and you cannot work for a week, these things are actually flaws. One, because it develops a poor relationship with the training, you don't look forward to it. I don't know anyone who looks forward to Widowmaker squats. And two, they tax recovery way too much. Now you can barely walk for a week, so you can't train legs again for a week, so you reduce frequency to a point where one could ask if it might have maybe been better to do a little bit less volume and intensity on that one set for that one day and just spread the volume around. Because at the end of the day, look at Widowmaker squats, it's 20 reps. Sure, the last 10 reps are super high intensity and crazy because they're beyond 100% and they're beyond failure, but that doesn't make them magical. They can still be replicated, they can still be spread and distributed throughout the week at some point. And by doing that, by spreading out the workload, you train more often, you experience less soreness, and you get better results because the intensity of each session is higher relatively than the intensity for the Widowmaker squats. A counter-argument to this would be to say that these 10 reps, these 10 forced reps, have a magical quality in a sense because they're above 100%, so they do something to your muscles that no other type of sets can do. I don't buy it. To me, it's the high intensity meme all over again. But we're going to see that this is sort of my issue. It's a hardcore mindset, and to me, it's being hardcore for the sake of being hardcore, meaning that there are better methods out there that produce similar results. But the people who are going to follow these methods and be do or die about them like them because they sound romantic to them. And this is sort of the thing with Tom Platz. The guy was a romantic. You listen to him talk about training, he was in love with the practice and that is great, but he was also disconnected from reality in the sense that he wasn't looking at training as numbers. To him, it was more about the fire, about the feeling. And that's not a bad thing. I told you that if you feel emotionally connected to a lift, you should stick to that lift as long as it serves you. But the question is, what if it stops serving you? What if the method that you follow, that super intense method of going to war with the weights, at some point becomes detrimental, but you are not able to tell because you're so in love with it? This is what we're doing today. We're trying to cut the emotional connection and try to see if maybe, just maybe, there are better options out there. Now, I don't want that to discourage you from trying or using Widowmaker squats. It worked for Platz, it can work for you. What I say, however, is that you should use that method with in mind all of the flaws and consequences that come with it, aka the very high fatigue and the tendency to shoot recovery. So how could we make up for these facts and still get the benefits? Well, in my opinion, the best way to run it would not be to do cycles of Widowmaker squats, but instead to do your normal squat routine and find a moment in the month where you can plug in the Widowmaker squat, give yourself some time to flush out fatigue afterwards and start anew. That way, the rest of the training weeks went just as well. You had your high intensity and high volume and your mental boosting set with the Widowmaker squat. In a sense, you got the best of both worlds. And the reason I insist on you getting leg workouts in outside of these high intensity, high volume workouts is because you, my friend, are most likely natural. You see, someone like Tom Platz claims to have only squatted twice a month at some point, meaning that no matter how many reps he did on these 2 days, it will not make up for the fact that he did not train legs the rest of the month. And this is when we get into the discussion of protein synthesis. A natural is going to train a muscle and is going to get a window of, some people say 48, some people say 72 hours, while the muscle is repairing itself and getting bigger and feeding off of the proteins in your system. PD users don't have to worry about that. Their injections trigger protein synthesis 24/7, so their muscles are always in that anabolic state and they're always growing. Meaning also that it could very well be that someone like Platz got most benefits from that training method and that it would work for him, but when applied to someone like you who is not on drugs, you might lose 50% of the benefits. Because you squat, you do your crazy squat session, then you cannot walk for a week, you think you're resting and you're recovering for the entire week, but in truth, 72 hours in, so half of the week in, your legs are already recovered. What you're dealing with afterwards is all of the stress that comes outside of the rest. It's not just most of the leg recovering. That's sort of the issue with the squat as well. Yeah, the squat is giving you a ton of stimulus for the entire body. It's also stressing the system out, stressing the nervous system out. All of this has to recover as well. Maybe you could have done a workout with less volume and intensity that would have stressed the legs just as much, but not stressed the system so much that now you have to wait for the system to recover for the legs to be able to squat again. Then there's also the problem of injuries. If you always go balls to the wall, your chance of injuries are much higher than if you control the number of reps and if you took a step back sometimes. Platz is also a good example of that. He was injured all the time. His shoulders were ripped apart, and to this day, he can barely lift his arms above his head, so he's still dealing with the consequences of that. He also tore his left bicep at some point, which forced him to retire. So he had to step away from the sport that he loved because he tend to take his training to the next level. And for him, that might be fine, right? He used to say that the gym was his life. So for him, dying in the squat rack was justifiable. But the question is it justifiable for you? Keep in mind that longevity and risk-taking behaviors aren't usually correlated when it comes to training in the gym for a long time. The people that always take risks, that never take breaks, and that train injured end up injured to the point that they cannot train anymore. So while you might make more gains if you push it every single time, you might get just as big and just lose a few percent of gains if you lessen the intensity a tiny bit and you did just a little bit less work on the squat and just spread the workload evenly. And again, that is assuming that you gain 100% from the fatigue you put in, but as I explained previously with the example of PEDs versus natural, chances are that you won't. Chances are that someone like Platz could justify these high-intensity methods because he was certain that he would gain 100% gains from it. You could gain 60%. And now you can't really justify it anymore. It's just risky for the sake of being risky. And that's what I call being hardcore for the sake of being hardcore. It's the issue with all of these motivation videos. I love them just as much as the next guy, but you do not have the proper perspective to understand them because you're not Platz. For him, all of that, again, dying under the bar, that's fine and all, because he's Platz. But you're not him. You're not Tom Platz. Platz was special, meaning that he would give advice to people like doing high bar squats or being as vertical as possible. That was very nice, but it was coming from the perspective of someone who is built to squat. And the $1,000,000 question is, do you think that he would have been so in love with the squat if he would have not been good at it? Let's say he would have sucked at it or get injured, because the squat is the one thing he never got injured on. Do you think he would still preach it to the level he preaches it today? Chances are he wouldn't. I know many of you guys who have long legs, and when you do your squats, you end up doing a good morning. You're not Tom Platz. Meaning that if he had been you, maybe he would have found another way around it. But there's a chance that you're going to want to stick to it because a guy with big legs told you that squats are superior and supreme and you should never skip it. But for you, it's just going to end up in catastrophe because you are not built for the lift. I think a good example is also the way he was doing leg extensions. Most people would destroy their knees if they tried to copy his form. Likewise with his set of 60 on the leg curls. Most naturals, if you did that to them, they would end up the next day so sore in the hamstrings, they would barely be able to walk. And then there's that romanticism that kicks in. You tell yourself, oh, that must be really effective. Well, maybe not. Maybe you are just really fatigued, but you're not going to gain as much as you think you're going to get because soreness is not correlated with muscle growth. And this is when you have to separate the sensation from the result, which is again extremely difficult if you're being blinded by your emotions. Now, does that mean that you should never go hard in the gym? Absolutely not. If you always stay away from difficult things, you're never going to look great. And it's true with squats. Many people who don't like squats will not be able to explain to you why logically. They will also provide emotional explanations, which all boil down to it is too hard. I don't want to do it because it is too hard. And if you do leg press because squats are too hard, then Platz is absolutely correct. You are missing out because you are not doing a lift that you should be doing simply because you are afraid of it. But there are ways to do squats that are not going to put you at risk and still gives you just as much benefits, if not more, because you are less likely to get injured. Again, it is always best to sacrifice a few percent of gains if it is going to ensure longevity and ability to stay consistent. Keep in mind that the best natural lifters are not the ones who are going super hard for 2 years and then crash and burn. It's the ones that are able to go for 20 years. So between a leg training methodology that is going to give you, 120% of the gains, but in 2 years you won't be able to stick to it anymore and you'll quit, or one that gives you 70% of the gains, but you can stay on it for 10 years, always select the second one because this is the one that is going to be the best for you. And that second method is always going to include precautions that are going to mitigate certain risks. For example, you can stay within higher rep ranges, something that Platz was doing, but instead of going to failure and beyond failure all the time, you can be a bit more conservative and just stop before failure sometimes. Not going to kill you again. These last few reps are not magical. They're very high intensity, they're very mentally challenging, but if you experience them once in a while and you cut them out once in a while, you're fine. A good example and comparison would be the sport of jiu-jitsu. The best practitioners, the best black belts, don't go at 100% every time they step on the mat. They do it sometimes to experience the intensity, but most of the time they flow roll, they take it slow, they practice technique. Why? Because if you go 100% all the time, you're going to crash and burn. If you think you go 100% all the time, you're not going 100% because it's simply not a level of intensity that is sustainable, and that is sort of my issue with that type of leg training methodology. Another thing you can also do is you can select lifts that align with your leverages to promote muscular failure over structural failure. If you cannot do high bar squats properly and the work doesn't go towards your quads, why are you still doing them? Find another variation that is going to be best suited to the way you are built. And of course, we would hope that that lift, that replacement lift, is still a squat, but it could be a hack squat. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that. And once you end up with that lift, even that lift that is going to be at the center of your leg training journey is not the only thing you're going to do for leg training. I personally have made that mistake in the past. I realized I was getting great benefits from doing squats only, so I kept doing it. But eventually you run into a wall. You squat 3 times a week with the same style every time, you're going to start getting injured, you're going to start to plateau. So what do you do instead? You treat the squat for the special lift that it is, and you allow it to take a step back. I understand it's tough because you start to question the supremacy of the squat, but look at it like this. The squat is your king. Are you going to send your king on the battlefield every single time? No, you're going to want him to be in the reserves for the moment where he can strike with impunity. The rest of the time, you're going to send the cavaliers. You're going to send the foot soldiers. And what are these? Accessory lifts, variation lifts, call them whatever the fuck you want. You're a bodybuilder. There are lifts that are going to be for your legs. They're going to send volume towards your legs. Leg extensions, leg press, belt squat things. All things that also coincidentally are going to deload your lower back. People rave about the squat being great, and I'm one of them. But why is it so great? Because it gives you a ton of stimulus. What is stimulus? Stimulus is also fatigue. Fatigue for what? For the spine. The squat is a heavy actual loaded movement, much more than the deadlift. So spamming it for legs is not a good idea because at some point your lower back becomes the limiting factor and we never want that. So to preserve your ability to squat for a long time and get benefits from the squat, you have to be fresh in that area, and to be fresh in that area, you have to squat less often. And since a Widowmaker squat does not give you the opportunity to follow up with any leg training because you're going to be entirely spent, It's the reason why that type of gung-ho method can only be used sparingly, because if not, you're just going to bury yourself underneath too much fatigue and you're not going to be able to progress in the long term. This questioning of lifts, especially the lifts that we love so much, is very important if we want to be able to preserve them in the long run. Because to me, if you can't justify a lift, and if your only justification is, well, it's the best lift, or it's the king of all lifts, or we've always done it, you're going to fall prey at some point to the optimal gurus who are going to be able to sweet talk you into giving up on them because you've never been able to explain with words why the lift was so great in the first place. Now that we understand, now that we know, and we see all of the benefits that come with squats and high intensity, high volume squats, we also better understand their flaws and how to make sure that we get the best of both worlds. That to me is intensity explained, and it's why I think that looking at Tom Platz's methods is so interesting and important. It's because we here have a man who always took it to the next level. He was always pushing the intensity, and he paid a price for it because there is a price associated. Always. So what do we learn from that? Well, we learn that intensity is nuanced and that we can maybe take it back a few notches, gain just as many benefits, but not run as many risks. And to me, that's the gist of hard work, and why hard work without smart work is just going to lead to your destruction. You have to have the ability to flirt between safety and risk, to always be in the middle. If you're too much of a pussy and you're too safe, you're going to be too far removed from quality sets and quality reps, and you're not going to get much gains. But if you're too much of a berserk and you're always too close to the risk factor, you're always going to get injured, you're always going to have plateaus and setbacks. And while the mindset of saying that going hard is always the best and you have to go to war with the weights and be hardcore sounds cool in theory, when you look at what happens when you actually apply it and what it does to your longevity, it truly is a question of, do you want to look cool or do you want to be able to make gains for a long time? I think that the people, the natural lifters at least, that get the best physiques are the ones that are able to find that balance. They're not cowardly in the gym, but they're not too brave either, because bravery sometimes rhymes with idiocy, and sadly, sometimes you think you're being brave, but in reality, you're only being an idiot. So I hope that this video helped you bring more nuance into your leg training, that it made you appreciate Tom Platz's sacrifices and mindset that much more, and that it made you realize the place that intensity has to hold within your training. Thank you for watching. Have a good night.